Well, it turns out that France has decided it's going to bring back military service. Why? What's going on there? Apparently it's because, Russia could come and invade the country or invade somewhere in Europe, and so they're going to potentially need people trained up, ready to put boots on the ground. Is that really the case? Is that really the motivation? Is it a good idea? Should we be looking at doing something very similar in the United Kingdom? Let's speak now to Macer Gifford, who is a former British volunteer fighter in Ukraine. Macer, it's always great to have you on the programme. You're one of my favourite human beings on this planet for your intrepid bravery and your honour. Now, talk to me about France bringing back military service. What do you think underlies this? Is this about the threat from Putin? Is this potentially something else? What would be your guess?
I think it is. I mean, a lot of the Scandinavian countries, Germany as well, have been building up their military forces. In fact, the whole of Europe is rearming at the moment. And there's a big conversation going on at the moment about conscription, about getting boots in the army and having a strategic reserve whereby something, a sort of a citizens' army almost of their own people, within their own people, to draw upon in the event of a war. Now, on continental Europe, the risk against them is far higher than in Britain. Most of these countries actually border Russia. In the Baltics, they are quite literally bordered, and on top of that, have been threatened by Russia in the past. So them building up their forces is absolutely wise. Now, we should also be having the same discussion in Britain because our armed forces are absolutely horrendously underfunded. They've been degraded over many, many years, and we just don't have the numbers to be a credible force anymore.
I mean, what should we be looking at in the United Kingdom? Because there's a couple of approaches to this. There is the Finnish approach, which is compulsory national service, or let's say France, who seem to be going in that direction, but they are also talking about doubling the number of reservists. And there is also the route of making sure you've got a reserve force. I myself am applying to be a reservist as it happens. What route do you think Britain should go down? Because there's a lot of people who are beginning to say, do you know what, national service could be a bit of a cure-all, where we've got a lot of young people who seem to lack drive, who seem to lack motivation, who seem to potentially lack patriotism or a sense of belonging, who might be a little bit wide of girth and loose on morals, might actually benefit from having a year of military-style training? Or is it that actually that is an outmoded concept, and the better thing we can do is look at men and women out there who want to serve their country, who are not doing it right now, who work in many different walks of life, but can give up a certain amount of days every year to do training and be ready in case a crisis happens?
Well, I would 100% support the idea of a conscripted force. As you say, I do think it would do a world of good to British society, which has been fractured as of late, to say the least. I think the idea of giving young people goals in life, giving them discipline and learning new trades and all the rest of it will be a great thing. But that being said, you've got to listen to the professional army and what they want. I actually err on the side of saying, OK, we don't necessarily want conscription in the UK. That maybe is an outdated model. But the idea of a citizens' army was put forward a few years ago about the idea of people just registering, having a better sort of understanding of who would join the British Army and how we would train them on scale. So basically putting in the infrastructure whereby we could, if called upon, say, OK, well, we know that we can get X amount of people into the army, 100,000, let's say, in a year. We need the ability to train them, to form new brigades and actually create the mass that the British Army needs in a relatively short space of time. As I said, conscription in the old style is not necessarily the right style. It's coming up with new ideas, fresh ideas that will actually help us build mass.
It seems to me, actually, that the idea of promoting and boosting reservists is a halfway house. It's almost sort of like the gateway drug to later on having national service. This idea that you encourage people voluntarily who might want the camaraderie, who might want to feel like they're serving their country, who might appreciate actually doing something radically different at the weekend, meeting different people, learning new skills, and knowing that, you know, cometh the hour, they can stand up and defend this country. Setting an example then to a younger generation before we say to them, look, come come one, come all, you've got to do this. Because I do wonder, especially when you look around, say, London, for instance, how many of these kids with their hoods up, going around on line bikes, nicking mobile phones, you'd be able to get doing press-ups and, you know, drills on a military base, and whether that's a good idea.
Well, as I said, I think it would be a good idea, and I think we mustn't underestimate young people. I think that, and we shouldn't underestimate the amount of people in the country who are patriotic, genuinely so, and would volunteer if a national crisis were to emerge. Now, I wouldn't. One thing about Britain is we are a maritime nation, and we don't have the same problems as continental Europe. And as far as I'm concerned, having the ability to build mass is important, and we should have a strategic reserve, by the way, of vehicles and weapons to actually arm this force. There's no point having 100,000 men and women volunteer to join the British Army only not to get the right kit when the time comes. But instead, what we should really be doing is investing in strategic assets, expensive assets, particularly in, let's say, the Royal Navy, the ability to deploy troops abroad and all the infrastructure that's needed there, in our aircraft as well, things that we can't build in a year. Because we can train a military force in a year, but what we can't do is build a substantial number of ships or aeroplanes. So investing in the right areas in the Royal Navy and the RAF is absolutely vital. And then making sure that the British Army, we recognise that the British Army really is the first wave of a substantial war in Europe. The first sort of 72,000 people would deploy, and then would need another 72,000 to follow on shortly afterwards. So it's having that ability to draw that mass together, train it properly, equip it properly, and then get it to the front line.
Talking about conscription, it's something that Vladimir Putin is looking at very closely, because he has come out and said he is going to fight, or ready to fight, until the last Ukrainian dies. This is amidst the idea that there can be a peace plan drawn up between Ukraine and Russia. The very first iteration of that appeared to be basically written by the Kremlin and loosely translated. Now Ukraine has come back with theirs, but it's very clear that Putin is not ready to back down. You can build as many golden bridges as you want. He wants to come away from this with the spoils of war. What approach should the West take?
Well, we need to recognise the threat here. Vladimir Putin has already received defeat. His sort of Maximus demands now are very different to the ones that he wanted back in 2022. He wanted all of Ukraine. And not only did he want all of Ukraine, I wouldn't have been surprised if Russian troops hadn't kept on going into Moldova. As soon as Ukraine had been defeated, they would have gone into Transnistria, a breakaway republic of Moldova. Moldova is not part of NATO. It's not part of the EU. It's the poorest country in Europe. And it is ripe. It is currently going through some terrible, terrible internal politics, all magnified by Russian interference. So that very much the target for Vladimir Putin was not just Ukraine. And he's also got his eyes on the Baltics. There was a call between David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, and the Kazakhstani foreign minister, I believe, that was released by the Russians, where the Kazakhstanis quite literally said to him that after Ukraine, we could have been next. They are very much afraid, and most of the countries around Russia are very much afraid of a resurgent Russia, of an aggressive Russia, one that wants to, as Vladimir Putin has said in the past, rebuild the Soviet Union. So we must first recognize that threat and then say to ourselves, well, we can't just hide behind Europe. We can't just rely on Vladimir Putin's goodwill not to push the boundaries even further than he has. We have to start investing in ourselves. We have to take this seriously, or else much bigger problems will come down further down the line.
Macer, thank you ever so much. Like I said, it's always an honour to speak to you. I do admire you greatly. That's Macer Gifford, former British volunteer fighter in Ukraine. He used to have a top job in the city, I believe, and then decided to give it all up to go fight ISIS. And then as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, he's like, right, I know where the action's at. I'm going in there to do the right thing. You don't get many men of that mettle, do you? But interesting, it seems to me that what Macer was suggesting is actually, on some level, the West's strategy is working, which is backing Ukraine, arming Ukraine has held Putin back. It's at least created a bit of a dam, and he's not been able to make the gains that perhaps otherwise he hoped he may have been able to. Where does that leave us going forward? Well, a lot of this, of course, rests in Mr. Trump's hands.